I'm going to introduce David Cook, the Executive Director of Institutional Research and Planning. He's going to lead today's session. Do you know how successful our students are? David began working at ICC in January 2000. He was hired as a research assistant in the Institutional Research Office. He later went on to manage the IR office, trained and served as a Six Sigma Black Belt, and served as the Director of Accreditation and Assessment. He took a position in July 2010 with Heartland Community College as their first Executive Director of Institutional Effectiveness. He has been in his current role since return to ICC in October 2013. Please help me welcome David Cook.
Hey! Thanks a lot, Ray. Can you all hear me? I've got this lavalier mic going on. Okay, very good. I have roughly 50 minutes and far too much material to cover with you. So it's going to feel a little rough and tumble, but I've got just a few discrete objectives I want to be able to cover today. Yeah, did you like that? That's the curtain. Yeah, right. I have way too much fun geeking around with these things. So I've got, as I said, just a few discrete objectives I want to cover with you today. Again, because there's just a ton of stuff. The idea here is to orient you to and focus you on what we're currently calling our institutional effectiveness measures, high-level measures of how well we are fulfilling our mission as an institution and to what degree we're making progress toward the variety of strategic goals that we have covered. So quick question, how many of you are leftovers from this last episode, College of Celebration of Learning? Very good. Okay, so many of you are familiar already. You've had preparatory work in talking about that context of our strategic goals right now and those 5 strategic goals. So again, the idea of this presentation isn't to dive deeply into the information and the data that we've got to show you. Again, it's to orient you what we're using in consideration of overall institutional effectiveness and a few other things. I want to be able to also show you some alternative perspectives on student success. We have the institutional effectiveness measures, but we have a variety of ways that we collect information on students' academic progress, on their various characteristics as they move through their curricula, their academic pathways here at ICC. I want to make sure that we touch on some of those so that you're aware of those. And also, to give you a fuller notion of the breadth of those resources, because, ideally, especially for many of you who were at this last episode here in Celebration of Learning, talking about our next steps in strategic planning, hopefully many of you will be volunteering to serve on some of those strategic planning teams. And if that's the case, then the collection and the consideration of data and evidence about the various goals and activities and initiatives you're taking on are going to become very, very important. So what are some of the resources that you have at hand? What are some of the things that you can tap Dave on the shoulder or the other folks who work in the Institutional Research Office about and inquire about, get some additional information and support on as you move through working toward these goals? So there's one other discrete objective, and it's to preview what is going to be a compendium of a lot of this very information I'm going to show you today, and in a lot more detail than what I'm going to show you today. So this is sort of a taste of what's to come in the 2007 Student Success Report, a report, compendium, again, that we hope to publish on an annual basis. We expect to publish on an annual basis. We've still got a little bit of work to do with it. I would anticipate within the next couple of weeks we should have that wrapped up, though, and have that available for the rest of the institution for your consideration. So, for those of you who weren't in this last session and talking about, and first of all, let me apologize. I know I have presented in this room so many times. I know damn well you can't read a thing on this screen most of the time unless it's like in 54-point font or something along those lines. My apologies for that. One of these days I will learn my lesson about that. Our 5 strategic goals form kind of the, well, let me reverse that. What we're going to talk about in terms of institutional effectiveness measures form a sort of backdrop against a lot of the dynamic work that's going to be done here in the areas of these strategic goals and the initiatives that move on a yearly basis toward achieving those goals. In the background, what you're going to see are those high-level measures of effectiveness that we hope to move the needle on. You would have heard Dr. Court-Bailey mention this morning in the all-college address that these institutional effectiveness measures take a while for us to move the needle on. They're the kinds of things that unfold over a number of years, and we don't fully know the breadth and the reach of the impact that we're having for a little bit of time. So in the foreground, though, we're doing these activities over this 5-year basis with the strategic planning. We have identified jobs to be done on a year-to-year basis in the institutional operational plan. And there's a lot going on at the department level also with process management and improvement on an ongoing basis as well. So rather than spend too much time on those goals, let's get into what these institutional effectiveness measures are and a little bit about nomenclature. We refer to measures as sort of these broad areas of consideration. And within these measures, we kind of break these down into discrete indicators. And you'll see what I mean as we get into this just a little bit further. Again, if you were at the all-college address this morning, you would have seen Dr. Court-Bailey refer to this matrix of the various planning activities. And the integration of those starts over here on that far right column, the gold-shaded column there with those institutional effectiveness measures. And I do refer to these as very integrative. They are woven throughout the various planning activities that I just mentioned, in fact, our strategic planning efforts, what we're doing on an annual basis with the jobs to be done in the institutional operational plan, as well as the things that are happening on an annual basis within departments and within academic programs as well. So that's where we're focusing on right now, those institutional effectiveness measures. When I talk about the integrative role of these, I'm talking about their representation not only as a broad representation of institutional effectiveness, but they are also reflective of that progress we're making on those 5-year strategic goals. The other thing to keep in mind about them is they don't supplant other institutional measures that we have been using. Some of you might recall that I have sort of a visual representation of how the organization works as kind of a framework of processes that work together on an integrative or sort of system level. The institutional measures are really kind of representative of all of that activity, kind of bubbling up, boiling up, and impacting some of these broad measures that we see. So it's not a supplanting or replacing of many of those things that we use to measure progress, maybe effectiveness at the unit level, but rather, again, as sort of a broader gestalt. Okay? Did I just use the word gestalt? 25 cents in my pocket. Thank you. Okay. So the measures that we're talking about, 6 of them. Student advancement. And what we're talking about in terms of student advancement is advancement over a period of time. We're talking about students who graduate, students who may transfer to other institutions, who persist in their studies and remain enrolled over a period of time, and what that looks like on the aggregate. Student persistence is a little more focused down. What can we say about about the persistence of our students from a fall term to a spring term, from a fall term to another fall term? Gateway success refers to the developmental imperative that we have of getting students to the level of college readiness. We want to know about students who move out of those developmental pathways, matriculate into college level coursework. We call that here, we refer to that here as gateway experience. How are they doing in that? And a little bit broader then sense of how developmental course success is going. 2 indicators there. We want to take a look at student completion. We want to look at the numbers of students, completers. We're also interested in knowing the total number of degrees and certificates that we're awarding on an annual basis. And to provide more of a comparative frame of reference on that notion of our credentials awarded, we also want to take a look at a 3rd indicator I'll show you in just a little bit. Lastly, we want to know about high school penetration. How are our early college efforts impacting the students in our K-12 systems, chiefly our 9 through 12 systems here in District 514, those that matriculate here to ICC and those who don't. Okay. Lastly, what I want to talk about, and you'll see this in the student success report, that compendium that I mentioned, we do a lot of subsetting on key student subgroups. And in particular, we're focused on these three areas. We have indicators that look at developmental progress, which is one of the areas that, that Dr. Quirk-Bailey mentioned this morning. But in many of these indicators, because we don't have time today, you'll see we'll talk about full-time and part-time success and our students' comparative success. We'll talk about Pell eligible students versus non-Pell eligible as sort of a proxy for low income, a pressing area of need for our entire district. And we also want to subset groups by race and ethnicity to see if there are gaps in the kind of progress, the success that we're hoping to see. So more on that a little later. All right. I know I'm diving right into this, but let's talk a little bit about student advancement. And real quickly, when you see I've got this stuff here, don't worry about that right now. Yeah, I know you can't read that. But for those of you who want to borrow this presentation, it's yours to borrow, to do with as, well, you know, to do with responsibly as you wish, but to share it with other folks throughout the institution, to enlighten them to what you heard today. That's sort of a reference point for most of you to be able to talk about this stuff. So what we mean by student advancement, many of you are very familiar, well, not all of you might be familiar with this, not as familiar as some, but with this notion of looking at student progress over a 3-year period of time, what's often referred to as 150% of normal time. And a very common way across institutions of doing that is to start with a cohort of students who begin in a fall semester and to make them sort of as similar as possible to gauge progress across institutions. So we look at students who are first time in college, in this case full-time, although we will subset that by part-time students as well, and who are considered credential seeking. The Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, or IPEDS, is probably the most common measure of graduation rates, transfer rates that are in use across a lot of institutions. So let's take a quick look then at what some of these look like. And we'll start with graduation rate. Again, these are first-time students, full-timers, degree or certificate-seeking students. And we have we show a progression here over time. The year reference that you see here is the reporting year. We give these students about 3 years to see how they do over that period of time. You'll see across a number of these charts, I've got a lot of comparative values here also. You'll always see ICC represented as a dark blue bar in any of these charts, or dark blue colored reference in any of these charts. But we also include information on what's known as ICCB Peer Group 4, a little more on that in just a bit, how other Illinois community colleges are doing, and how community colleges across the nation are doing in terms of this 3-year graduation rate of these first-time, full-time students. There is no comprehensive exam on what the actual rates of transfer or graduation or persistence is going to be. My purpose here is to give you an idea, again, of what it is we measure and a general notion about our progress, the progress of our students. So you can see here that going back to the reporting year of 2013, we've seen a really nice upward trend of those graduation rates. Compared to our peer groups, to Illinois community colleges in the nation, they're really quite enviable, in fact. So we've been making really great progress over that period of time. Now, let me cut away just for a moment and talk about that peer group. We like to use this, and in particular, our trustees like to see this comparative value used. The peer group is defined by ICCB, okay? And they define peer group 4, where Illinois Central College is, as those institutions located in downstate urbanized areas. Okay? So they're trying for some degree of geographic similarity to those other institutions. They include Black Hawk College, Heartland, Lincoln Land, Parkland, Richland, Rock Valley, Southwestern Illinois. I would argue Rock Valley might not necessarily be downstate. But, okay. The point of this is, and I think it's important to remember, I get asked a lot about, David, what are our legitimacy colleges when we're talking about things like graduation rates and so forth. If you're looking for a legitimacy group among ICCB colleges, that's typically what we use. So file that away for future reference if that's of any interest to you. Okay. We also take a look at transfer rates. So those students, again, in that same entering cohort, who 3 years later have transferred to another institution. Now, these are students who have not completed a degree, but who have transferred to another institution within that 3-year period of time. A couple of things I think you can observe about this is we have a generally level rate of transfer over the last 5 years or so. And it trails a little bit behind some of those comparative groups that we're including here. The peer group, all of those Illinois community colleges, which is a really high rate, but we do outperform generally the nation's average for transfer groups. Could be various reasons for that. And that would be prime line of inquiry for some plucky strategic planning group, for example, or really anybody else who's interested in the idea. What can we say about articulation agreements? What can we say about what we do to facilitate transfer to other institutions? Lots of different areas of inquiry behind a stat like this.
So David,
yes?
This one here is people that graduated and...
No.
So these
Nope.
are non-graduates.
Correct.
So the slide you showed us before was the people that graduated.
Correct.
So they could have graduated and then transferred, so they wouldn't be here, but they would be on that one?
That's correct. So students in that cohort are placed into discrete groups, okay? You either graduated, you transferred, you're still enrolled, you're nowhere to be found, generally speaking. Now, you can legitimately back out of those cohorts for reasons like you went into the military, you went into the ministry, you passed away, things along those lines. But generally speaking, everybody gets grouped into one of those buckets using this methodology. Now, there are other measurement systems that also determine, in addition to who may have graduated from ICC, who graduated and completed a credential, who graduated and completed a credential somewhere else. Those are some alternate perspectives, but to what we're using here.
Or our students are not graduating, they're transferring before they're done.
Correct. And that's what you're looking at here, actually.
That's what I'm asking.
Right. They have not earned the credential here, but transferred to another institution within that 3 period.
For whatever they needed, but they didn't want to finish up whatever the requirements are, and then they went.
There could be a variety of reasons for that, but that could be one of them. Yep. Okay. Yes, Scott.
Is it fair to combine this with the previous one as far as students who are succeeding?
Aren't you smart? Yes. Because we're going to combine that actually with another rate. We're going to combine it actually with this still enrolled rate. Because we're also interested in knowing about students who are still persisting in their studies. Maybe they haven't graduated yet, maybe they haven't transferred to another institution, but they're still here at ICC. They're still working on getting that. You can see, because we're talking about full-timers, at least those students in the fall who were full-timers, those are relatively low percentages, right? If you're starting out full-time, there's a good chance maybe some of these students have had to go to part-time status, for example, but they're still working at it. So in reference to your question, Scott, we combined those 3 discrete groups, right? Transferred, or rather graduated, transferred, still enrolled, into what we call an advancement rate. And when we take a look at those stats all together, combined, and take a look at our comparative values, we can see that going back to that 2013 reporting year and moving forward, we've been making great incremental progress from 53% up to just over 58% over that 3-year period. You can see that a lot of our other comparative groups have done the same thing. Colleges here in Illinois, colleges among our peer group have also seen those increases. There's a lot of attention on student persistence and completion over the last several years. A lot of literature being generated around the completion imperative and so forth. A lot of discussion around formatting your very core activities to the student success imperative. Could be one reason, could be others. Okay, so those are the 4 indicators within that student advancement measure that we talk about. I also mentioned student persistence. We're specifically looking at students who persist from the fall semester to the spring semester and from the fall semester to the subsequent fall semester. When we're doing that, we're using a definition from this group, the National Community College Benchmarking Project. NCCBP has been around for a good long time, and we have here at ICC participated in NCCBP, a voluntary data submission from which we get benchmarking information. Boy, it's going back to maybe 2004, 2005 when we first started participating in NCCBP. On average, year to year, anywhere between 200 and 250 other community colleges are participating in that program, submitting data on, gosh, I think it's up to about 120 different individual variables about the institution. It's a lot of stuff. And it's some pretty heavy lifting getting that stuff together, at least it used to be, but thank God for a data warehouse because that's making it a whole lot easier to do these submissions. That definition, though, is important because it's not the same as the perspective we were just looking at with student advancement. With student advancement, we're looking at, here are some new students starting in the fall. Let's see where they progress. This definition is more specific to the fall term. Students who finish out that fall term, they're here at the very end, and then who are here at the very beginning of that subsequent spring or that subsequent fall semester. Okay? It's a slightly different definition. And what we're doing there is we're also backing out students who completed a degree or certificate. Okay? So what you can see here is fall to spring retention. Again, a nice upward trend that we have seen since 2014, where we were just below 64% of those students at the end of the fall term who didn't complete a degree or certificate, but who showed up in that next spring semester, all the way up to a 2017 value of just shy of 70%. So we've seen some really nice upward increases in those rates of students who are persisting from the fall to the spring. The comparative value that you see there, that gold bar, that's the median value for all of those other institutions in NCCBP who are participating, okay? That's the 50th percentile of all of those 200 some on a year-to-year basis who are participating. So you can see that while we have had good upward climb in that rate, generally speaking, we still have a gap between where we're at that median value of all NCCBP participating institutions. There's a little bit of ground to be made up. At the same time, that margin gets smaller and smaller and smaller, which is good news.
Could you
Paulette.
go back to the definition of the fall to spring retention? Do they actually have to enroll in the spring?
Yes. Yeah, they have to
And
be
that makes them
retained.
Retained.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
So, okay, got it.
So, and I believe the capture is at census day of that following spring. Similarly, we take a look at that following fall. So they were here at the end of that fall term, then the subsequent fall term at census day, they're back at ICC. Again, they haven't completed a degree or a certificate. We back those completers out of there. Again, we're making good fall-to-fall progress. Gosh, what else can I tell you about this? This includes full-timers and part-timers, right? We are not, this is important, we are not including dual credit students in here. High school students are not included in here because, as you can understand, they persist at crazy percentages. You know, there are just a handful that don't persist in those dual credit and dual enrollment, so they kind of throw things off. We want to know about those college-level students and what they're doing. So good upward trend to the 2017 value. And the only reason you don't see a comparative value for 2017 is we just submitted and cleaned that data. So we won't see that yet for a little while, but it should be coming pretty soon. We're closing that gap to that median value among those NCCBP participating institutions. Okay?
And these are fiscal years, so the fall 2017 numbers actually are fall of 16.
Yes and no. Okay, and this is simply it's a question I really don't like answering for NCCBP because there's a lag. What NCCBP is asking us for in 2017, what they just asked us for, was give me the stats of your students back in 2015 who were here in the fall of 2015. And did they show up in the fall of 2016? Okay? Because fall 2017 hasn't happened yet. So what I put here is I refer to the reporting year. Because it's sort of, if I put the actual year there, I get asked the question, well, why is that data 3 years old? Or why is that data 2 years old? And then I have to explain the same thing over again. So there's no. It's I have gone back and forth about what should I report here? Should I report the reporting year or should I report the actual term? So if you've got good feedback for me on that, what's easier for you to understand, let me know. Because if it's easier to report that term. So what you're actually looking at here in that 2016 value is students who were here in the fall of 2014 who persisted to the fall of 2015. But we reported it in 2016. Sorry?
Use that as the measure x-axis.
Okay, good. That's
I don't know about the rest of you, but that would help.
they don't care how you report it. That's just how they define it. I didn't mean to rabbit hole this situation by any means. If it's clearer to you, I am happy to change it. As I said.
It's just confusing because you said you reported on Census Day, and we know Census Day.
Correct.
Happened,
Right.
So where did that?
No, that's a good point. All right.
It's no big deal.
Understand this is what we just reported here in 2017. I'll change that. All right. I'm going to move on to Gateway Course Success. This is another NCCBP definition where we're looking at students who would have completed the highest level of developmental education in either math or English, and we're going to look at those two subjects separately, and then went on to their first college level class. And the notion here is to look to see how successful they were in that first college level class. On the math side of things, you can see we do fairly well. And in fact, we perform pretty well, a little bit variable over the last 5 years or so, a little up and down, but we perform generally very well against that median value of other NCCBP reporting institutions. Now you look at that percentage of course success and you say, well, that's really very high. And that's really a function of this definition. Think about these are students who completed that highest level of developmental ed. Okay? So among all of the students who are participating in developmental ed, it's a fairly, it's a smaller number, who then go on and take that first college level math class subsequent to completing that developmental ed class, and then go on to successfully complete it. So it's a somewhat smaller number than students who are enrolled in developmental education courses in general, in math and English. But by the looks of it, they're really quite well prepared for that first step into college level math. On the English side, it's very similar. Variability from year to year, generally perform pretty well against that median value, except in a couple of these years.
It says they're taking English developmental course, but then how they perform.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Is that correct?
Nope. That's a typo. Excuse me. Right. That is they have completed developmental English. They go on to their first college level English class. That's a typo. I'll have that corrected. Thank you for pointing that out. As you can see, variable percentages, but when we do well, gosh, that's an 83, 84% success rate among those students. So getting them through that and getting them to actually enroll in those subsequent college level courses, maybe where the trick lies. But again, lots of lines of inquiry to take from this sort of broad metric. I'm going to take a look now at developmental education coursework. This is across all developmental coursework in math and English. Might be a typo here or two. I don't know. We'll have to take a look. What do we have here? We've got developmental math, and across all of those developmental, these are successful completers of that developmental class. Completers. The NCCBP definition wants to know about completers. They don't want to know about students who may have withdrawn at some point during that. Okay, so you can see necessarily we've got, by extension, some pretty good percentages of successful completers. There is a flip side to that. And to take a look at the students who start that developmental coursework but maybe do not finish it. So another good line of inquiry to keep in your back pockets. C or better. NCCBP defines it as C or better. Yep. Is that on there? Can you see that? All right. So here, yeah, if you're digging into this thing, enrolled in developmental math or English in the given fall term, earned a C or higher. Okay.
So David makes a good point here. If, not that this is happening at ICC, but if half of your students are dropping out before the class ends because they're not successful, that would explain high rates with students who are still struggling, right? I'm not saying that's the case here, but when you look at this data, one of the things you want to look at are how many students do you lose along the way? And what can we do to help more of them actually successfully complete the course? So another piece of data you may want to look at as you're working on those solutions.
I guess how do we, I mean, you're doing a wonderful job. But how would we get access to this? Like, do we send you or Brandy an email and say, can you get this, is our data warehouse able to answer this question, X, Y, Z? I mean, how do, you see what I'm saying? How do we ask, how do we make queries? And how do we get that information? I mean, I realize you don't want everybody to give everybody query access to the warehouse. I understand that. But that would not be safe. But the process, I guess, if we have questions that relate to some project, and you know, how do we get that data? Or do we even have that data? I mean,
well,
instead of just go.
Chances are good that we have some means of answering your question. And again, it depends on the nature of the question. And there are a few different ways, a few different doors to the information resources that we would typically use. From your end, from a user's perspective, there is always contacting the IR office directly. We're in the process of, we had a great workflow tool working, aged out. We're working on another request form workflow tool for the office to take just those kinds of requests. For the time being, an email works just as well. A phone call works just as well. The sort of public front door to the data warehouse is what we call the BI Center, and it's available off the website.
Right.
You can get to it off the website. Now, most folks are provisioned into it with no problem. Maybe some newer folks who haven't used it yet would need to contact us. Brandy Thatcher would be the one to contact about that. You know, if you've arrived at the college new or you haven't had access to it before, you do need to be provisioned into it. It takes about 15 seconds. You need to log off, log back on, that sort of thing. But then you have access to it.
So this is you got this kind of stuff out of the BI Center. So like we have access to it. So we could, but I don't think we have query access. We just have.
If you're able to get in, you're able to work with many of the dashboards that are there. And we have also been revising a lot of our training curriculum, right? So we have been working primarily with academic deans, for example, on establishing sort of a suite of dashboards that they use for accessing those data. Again, Brandy has been, she's pretty much it for working with it. We've had to, well, we've endured a couple of different upgrades to the site and to the software itself. She's got some new skins out for the BI site itself. but she is your best reference for, let's get a few people together, let's sit down, walk me through how this is done, how we manipulate the information that's coming out of the data warehouse and available in the BI Center. She's been fantastic about sitting down with individual groups to do that, to pursue that line of inquiry. So you can talk to me more about that offline. Happy to provide that information for you.
So David, earlier on in the presentation, said that we'd be getting out in the next several weeks a student success report. So annually, what we will be putting together is all of these matrices that you're being exposed to now, disaggregated by those groups, by race, ethnicity, by full part-time, by Pell, non-Pell, right? So you can not only see these numbers, which are the averages for the college, right, but you can see who's impacted in different ways, and we'll make that available, just a complete analysis, right, out on the web for everybody to see. And then if you have specific questions like these teams, research will be acting as consultants to those teams, so whatever particular research questions they have, all that data can be provided. And then if you have particular issues within your department or projects you're working on, you can make those requests to IR. So we're working really hard to make far more information, it's always been there, but we're trying to be a little more sort of pre-planning, a little more predictable about the things you might need, just putting those out there so you don't have to ask. Then you can always still go work with IR on your particular needs.
And has been the case for 10 or more years. We have the Q drive, of course, and there's a folder on the Q drive, IR Quick Access. It's been in place for the last 12 or 15 years. That's where all NCCSSE results go. That's where all IPEDS GRS results go. That's where our CCSSE results, our SSI, great colleges, PACE, all of that information is there, has been there as a sort of a hard, digital, but more of a hard copy, static sort of resource for that sort of information.
And I will say that Brandy does a great job on her training for the business.
Oh,
center.
yeah. Okay, I know I'm getting pressed for time here, so I need to move on a little bit. The three indicators in student completion that we're taking a look at, total number of completers, individuals, okay? That's one aspect. And as you can see, we've maintained a fairly steady output, a 4-year average of just over 1,700 degrees and certificates. The reason why this goes back to 2012 is that IPEDS, the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, only started reporting individual completers from that 2012 academic year. But they have been reporting total credentials awarded over that same period of time. So a 5-year average here of just over 1,800. So every year we have a number of students who are completing more than one credential, clearly. What you see from these last two slides also is that, wow, compared to our peer group and compared to other institutions in Illinois and across the nation, we really have a very healthy output. So we do like to take a look at total completions per 100 FTE to provide maybe a more comparable statistic to those other groups. So as you can see, that evens things out just a little bit, given that a number of those peer group institutions are smaller than we are. That in the state of Illinois, we're in the top 10 in terms of enrollment at institutions across Illinois. And comparatively across the US, we are considered if not a large institution, a medium-large institution, somewhere in that range, by virtue of our student population. So, output measures. Okay. High school penetration, we take a look at a couple of different metrics here. First of all, we want to know about the percentage of those District 514 high school graduates who at some point earned any early college credit through ICC. They may not have matriculated to ICC for college, but at some point during their high school careers, they took a class with us for dual credit or dual enrollment. Credit, class, okay? On average, we're looking at, considering public and private institutions in District 514, it's a good, boy, I'm going to misquote myself in terms of total numbers of graduates. I'm going to back off of that because I'm going to say something and be wrong about it. I'm going to have to send out an email to everyone and forget it. So we're looking at about a third of those graduates, though, every year who graduate, who at some point in their senior and their junior years, they tapped us for some dual credit or some dual enrollment, which is excellent, really healthy. Another really healthy statistic about these early college efforts is the penetration rate. So, back off of early college, although it could be an influencer to this statistic, which shows you the number of graduates from our District 514 high schools, both public and private, who do matriculate to ICC in that fall semester following their spring graduation. These rates, although they look like they're declining somewhat from the 34% for the fall 2012 and 2013 years, I can say by comparison, this is another NCCSSE stat. I didn't have the median values handy for some reason, and I need to plug those back in. What I can tell you about those, though, is our rates that are approximately 30 to 33% every year are generally in the 90th and higher percentile. It is an exceedingly enviable rate of matriculation of high school graduates. Of course, it's been our bread and butter for a number of years. I mean, our general education transfer level coursework has been a substantial portion of our credit hour offerings over the number of years. Very healthy.
High school graduation rates have been declining also, too? Or what are high school graduate, I mean...
Class sizes, you mean? Class, are you talking about the total numbers of district graduates?
Because, I mean, 1/3 is a big number, 1/3.
Right, in terms of enrollment, you're exactly right. So, I mean, this is comparable because it's a percentage, right? But we haven't seen the drop in high school, the numbers of graduates that other
Correct.
districts have seen.
That's right.
We're at a much slower slope, so that really isn't as predictive. So if we can keep the rate fairly consistent, we should keep the enrollment fairly consistent. There are some districts in the state that have seen people are moving out of those areas and there's not as many people in high school. So you may still get 30%, but it's a lot less students. It's not as impactful on us because our rate of that change isn't as, and in fact, it's predicted to be going back up here with the kids.
Actually, it is, yeah.
In elementary and middle school, we'll climb a little bit.
Okay. That was the rough and tumble run through the institutional effectiveness measures. 6 measures, 15 indicators. Again, in that student success report, you'll see a lot of disaggregations of those figures by those relevant student populations that we had talked about a little bit. But again, what I also wanted to do, and I'm going to have to go through this pretty quickly, is give you an idea of some of the other perspectives that we have on student success. And the first of which is the voluntary framework of accountability. We are in only our second year of participation with VFA. We are in the process right now of submitting our second data file submission to VFA. VFA is a project of the American Association of Community Colleges. It started really just a few years ago. So we're still on the kind of early end of overall participation of the life of the VFA. In Illinois, in fact, there are just, I think, 7 other institutions that participate in VFA right now. AACC is really making some efforts to provide more participation, allow for more participation in VFA. In total, it's somewhere on the order of 150 to 200 community colleges across the U.S. that do this. There are 4, we'll call it 4 general areas in terms of measures that they encourage institutions to take a look at least from our level of participation, okay, at this point. So it includes developmental progress through developmental coursework. It includes progress over a period of 2 years for entering cohorts. It includes outcomes of those entering cohorts after a 2-year period. And then it also takes a snapshot 6 years later of the outcomes of those entering cohorts. So let's talk a little bit about, and I'm just going to give you a taste of this stuff, the kind of information that we get back from VFA. For example, developmental math coursework, and they look at developmental writing, English as well. Give us an idea of the percentages of students who require developmental coursework among these various entering cohorts. VFA defines these cohorts in a few different ways. I won't go into it. Generally speaking, we're all talking about students who are starting their college careers at ICC for the first time. Let me back up just a moment. So without getting into too much detail about the definitions of these cohorts, main cohort is anyone new to ICC in the fall, credential seeking, first time in college, looking for a degree or certificate. And then that first time in college is intended to duplicate or mimic that IPEDS entering cohort as well. First time in college, credential seeking. On the developmental side, in terms of progress, any of these cohorts break down to a series of additional measures. For instance, on the developmental path, how many actually of those students who required or were deemed to have tested to have determined through assessment testing to require any developmental math, what percentage of them actually attempted it in that first 2 years? What percentage then became college ready by completing the highest level of developmental coursework in either math or English? And then finally, in that 2-year period of time, after completing that highest level developmental math, how many completed any college level math? So as you can see, this paints a very different picture of what that developmental progress looks like. Back to that other slide, you can see, you know, any one of these cohorts, 45% of them, 40 to 45% of them, are assessed as having some need in developmental math, whatever level that is, 3 levels, 2 levels, 1 level. But the degree of progression that we're seeing, is that good enough for us? That's what the VFA provides us, a diagnostic, some dials to tell us how are we doing in moving those students through that developmental coursework. Again, we can look at it from the math perspective, we can look at it from the writing perspective. There's a perspective that looks at all of that combined as well. In addition to developmental progress, they provide 2-year progress for students who are in what's considered college-level coursework. Again, these are entering cohorts. And we get information back on, okay, what was that fall to next term retention of the main cohorts? What was the first term credit success rate, that first fall term? After 2 years, what was the credit hour success rate? Okay, of attempted hours, how many were they successful at completing? And then finally, how many of those students reached a credit threshold? It's arbitrary in the VFA. Full-time students, it's, I think, 42 hours. Part-time students, they want to know how many of them reached a credit threshold of 24 hours, I believe, over that 2-year period of time. So again, sort of progress or momentum point measures for these various entering cohorts. What's also important to note about VFA are the various subgroups of students that they look at within these measures also. I've illustrated just a couple of them here, including full-time and part-time students. Those students who are considered college ready or didn't require any developmental coursework upon entry, and then those students who were considered not college ready in either math or English. Okay, so different slices of those groups of students that we can take a look at. They also include gender, race, ethnicity, and PEL status in the VFA. So lots of different ways that we can slice and dice that information to look at those progress measures, as well as outcome measures for over that 2-year period of time. What percentage completed a degree or certificate? What percentage transferred? What percentage is still enrolled? Very similar to those advancement rates we were taking a look at just a little while ago. We get that on a 2-year perspective with VFA. We also get that with 6-year perspective, though I didn't include that information here as well. The 6-year perspective looks at some more nuanced information that Dorothy, I was mentioning a little while ago about, well, don't just show me who completed a credential, how many did it here at your institution, and then how many did it at a subsequent institution, how many went on to complete, and so forth. So a little more nuanced from that 6-year perspective. Lots of stuff to dive into with the VFA, Voluntary Framework of Accountability. There's just an example of some subsetted information. We also pull a lot of information as of late from National Student Clearinghouse's post-secondary completions reports, which is another 6-year perspective on entering cohorts, so we can provide information back on some similar progress metrics. They use slightly different definitions, so a different perspective on what that progress looks like, but very similar kinds of percentage breakdowns of your entering cohorts. How many completed at the same institution? How many completed their first credential at a 2-year or a 4-year? They provide information also on students who may have gone on to complete a 4-year degree also. If you want to know more about National Student Clearinghouse, happy to tell you about it. No time right now. It's a fantastic resource for us, though. Just an amazing service, particularly for community colleges, from a variety of different angles. They also provide some disaggregated information for us on enrollment intensity, which is a really interesting perspective. Students who attended exclusively full-time over a 6-year period, exclusively part-time, some who exhibited mixed enrollment. A couple of things that we learned from that is those students who attend exclusively part-time, highly at risk. Large percentages of them, 6 years later, have not completed a credential, are not still enrolled. Really alarming statistics. The other thing about mixed enrollment intensity, it's a large group. We have lots of students who attend in some terms full-time and in some terms part-time. For various circumstances, again, lines of inquiry perhaps we need to follow up on. Age at entry, gender, and then they look at enrollment intensity by age of entry also, and where we get smaller subgroups of students that we can study, again, developing more questions, lines of inquiry from that. Last thing I want to talk about, Community College Survey of Student Engagement. If you're an instructor, it is entirely possible that I or some of my cohorts darkened your classroom doorways just this last spring to administer the CCSSE in your class. The Community College Survey of Student Engagement asks questions about behaviors on the parts of students, Ray was one of my stalwarts, in fact, in administering the CCSSE. But they ask questions about student behaviors, academic behaviors, as well as behaviors they perceive on the part of the institution also. The questions on the survey are rolled up, if you will, indexed, if you will, to these 5 benchmarks of student engagement. They include active and collaborative learning, student effort, academic challenge, student-faculty interaction, and support for learners. And there is a ton of research behind this instrument and its partner instrument, the NESE, which is used at the 4-year institution. But these folks at the Community College Leadership Program down at the University of Texas at Austin have been administering this for a number of years. Our history with the CCSSE goes all the way back to 2004. 2017 being our most recent year. We just got this data back from the CCSSE, literally just a couple of weeks ago. And so our 2017 results are back. I know this is pretty small. Here's what I can orient you to on the chart, though. These are, of course, arranged by year in ascending. So all the way to the right are our results for 2017. The column to the very far right, dark green, is the CCSSE benchmark, which is, when considering all students, always standardized to a score of 50, standard deviation of 25. So it makes it for a very easy comparison. Every year, standardized score on the CCSSE for all students, score of 50. The benchmark itself runs from 0 to 100. So you see where you stand relative to that CCSSE benchmark, standardized benchmark of 50. And as you can see, student effort in this year turns out to be our lowest value, but we've got a pretty solid score here, benchmark score on active and collaborative learning. CCSSE results, as I said, we just got them back, are going to be a lot a pretty strong focus of mine over the coming several weeks here so that we're able to get this information back out. A couple of the things that they provide for us, one of the most important breakdowns that CCSSE provides in that data is on that part-time, full-time basis. And again, there's a whole lot of literature supporting their reasoning for doing that. So without going too far into what these data actually say in terms of the full-time and the part-time cohorts, when you break apart the CCSSE data, you do away with that standardized 50 score, by the way. So that's why you're seeing benchmark scores for full-time among the national cohort exceeding 50. Okay? It's when we're looking at all those students. Explanation for another time, though. One of the very helpful things that CCSSE does, though, is that they will break down for you initially some areas where you have high levels of student engagement, lower levels of student engagement. And what they're doing here is item analysis. They're looking at specific items from the CCSSE that tell you about, that are supported in the literature, that tell you about areas where you're having high degrees of engagement relative to the national norm versus those where maybe it's not happening. On aspects of highest student engagement, our students report high frequencies of making class presentations, of working on papers or projects that require integrating ideas or information from various sources, talking about career plans with instructors and advisors, writing, just volume of writing lots of papers of various length, and their degree of usage of academic advising and planning. On that lower side, we see some various areas, one area in particular in active collaborative learning that falls pretty far below that national average positive percent response rate, right, across all students. Most of those areas, as you can see, though, line up in that area of student effort, and they're reflected in that overall benchmark, aren't they? So helping you cope with your non-academic responsibilities, work, family, etc. That is an area of where we really, really need to develop some keen insights on, some real keen intelligence on the struggles outside of the institution that our students face, especially when we're looking at adult populations like those referred to in Dr. Cork-Bailey's address this morning. Peer and other tutoring, not taking advantage of it. Skill labs, not taking advantage of them. Computer labs, again, not taking advantage of those. So the point of this is not to say, here are the things we need to focus on, but rather the opportunity with the CCSSE is to do that item analysis. Every one of those benchmarks, you can break them apart into their component pieces. All right, what are the questions that they're asking us about in that area of student effort? Let's focus on these initially. What are the areas of disparity that we're seeing among full-time and part-time students in these areas? Let's take a look at those. And now maybe let's convene some conversations. Let's get Dan Kelly to put another panel of students together and ask them specifically about some of these questions. Let's do some qualitative inquiry into these areas. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. So hopefully I have accomplished these things. You've been oriented to, you've got an idea about our 6 institutional effectiveness measures, the 15 benchmarks that make those up. Hopefully you have an idea of what are some of the alternative perspectives on student success that we strive to develop every year and provide for folks. Hopefully now a notion of what those breadth of those resources are that you bring back into those strategic planning teams perhaps, or develop on your own line of inquiry. And then finally, you must be chomping at the bit, right? Is that champing or chomping? I know it's spelled with an A. Okay. About that student success report that we really will, we're very close to having done. We should have available to the rest of the institution here just within the next couple of weeks. Okay, that said, one more curtain. Love it. All right. Comments? Questions? Yes?
Do you have a question? I don't remember what year, but it was in recent times that after a CCSSE, we were kind of told that we didn't have enough rigor in our classes. So I'm wondering, is that still related to student effort? Does that go under that same kind of?
By the sound of it, it has a foot in the student effort camp. It may also have a foot in the academic challenge camp as well. I would think you'd want to take a look at the various items within each of those benchmarks, just to see what, among which questions are they hitting against those concepts of academic rigor.
I wasn't sure what that student effort really was referring to. Then you said, well, they're not using the help labs that are available.
Ah,
I wasn't sure if it was, we weren't challenging them enough.
I'm
or-
trying to determine if that's going back to
Actually,
20.
I think that the piece about the challenge in the classroom actually goes in the first, and whether the students are reaching out to take advantage of what's available is in the effort.
Right, their frequency of use, right.
But I bet if people in this room were interested, we could get David at some point to put together another hour-long presentation just on CCSSE, so you can see what all that information is and dig deeper. Because at this level, you see how we perform, but really neither here nor there. What you really want to dig into is
Absolutely.
what did we not do well on, that would really help you and your disciplines and your departments try to figure out what you might want to tweak. So this was just to give you a taste, and David did a wonderful job of that. But any of this stuff you want to delve more deeply into in terms of your discipline or department, or if you're on a strategic planning team and this data is relevant, we'll spend far more time orienting people to all of this.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Exactly related to anything you covered today, but, well, I think it's related. It's not part of what you covered. In the past, maybe the last one I saw was a year or two ago, we used to get regular emails comparing how well our students who went to various four-year institutions within the state did compared to those who started there or those who went to all Illinois community colleges.
Right.
And I haven't seen those in a little while, and that, to me, I always wondered why we couldn't just broadcast that information because it always looked so good, and I thought it would be wonderful advertisement for us.
Agreed.
But just was curious about where that stands.
The four-year institutions are not compelled, unfortunately, to provide that to us like they used to be. The ICCB used to facilitate from all of the public institutions. I mean, we get them from Governor State, we get them from Northeastern. Now we regularly get them from ISU. We sporadically get them from Northern, Western. UI system is pretty good about providing those as well. Points well taken. Even if it is just a couple of institutions, we should be providing that information on a more regular basis.
I thought we were told not to, or else they wouldn't give it to us.
We're not allowed to use it for marketing purposes.
Right.
He's no longer here.
And we're doing a little of that anyways, you saw this morning. So one of the things that we're talking about at the Council of Presidents is, I mean, this is a state system, that information should be available and transparent. Universities don't like it because if you can save money and outperform, why wouldn't you go to a community college first? So we're in those conversations. So they used to freely give it, now not as much. And not just, I don't think it's a sharing thing. I mean, the universities, as much as our budgets went down, they were mostly funded by the state and weren't getting any money, right? So I think as they started reporting for other agencies, goes really far down on the list when you don't have enough money to pay your bills and you're laying people off, right? So we will still pursue that. We get it from someone, we can share what we get. But I think it's a very important thing for us to share, and it's only fair. We're funded by the taxpayers, so are the universities. It's only fair for people to understand what that data is and what those success rates are. So that's an issue we're working at the President's Council level.
If I had a dime for every time I heard the promise of the Illinois Longitudinal Data System finally fully being online and available for state-level institutional researchers to use, I probably wouldn't be here talking about CCSSE. But can I answer any other questions? And I thank you for being here. Yes, go ahead.
In terms
Dr.
of the
Yan.
data, when we sign in articulation agreements, I think they could be one of those conditions upon which we sign those agreements. And I tried it, and they'll give them to you at the appropriate time as part of the agreement.
Okay.
So you have a 2+2 with NIU.
Sure.
You put it in the agreement.
So there may be some avenues to making that more regular.
Yes, just
Okay, thank you.
everywhere. Right. Good job. Good job.
All right.